I was her best friend for 54 years. That's what people said, anyway. And they weren't wrong. At least, not completely. And still, I didn't go to her funeral. Her name was Marion Lynn Briggs. Everyone called her Mary, except me. I always insisted on Marion. It annoyed her, which made me love it more. Mary is a nun, I used to say. You're more of a woman who sneaks whiskey into weddings. She'd pretend to glare, but she'd smirk anyway. She liked it when I told the truth, even when she didn't. We met in 1965, behind the gym, where I caught her trying to light a cigarette with a matchbook that was too damp to catch. It had been raining that morning, and everything smelled like earth and teen sweat. I had just gotten detention for rolling my eyes at Mr. Cotter in math class. She had just transferred in, the new girl. Red lipstick already smeared, eyeliner a little too dark. She looked like someone from a movie I wasn't allowed to watch. I sat next to her without asking. We didn't say much, just stared at the puddles and listened to the cheerleaders scream across the field. At some point, she handed me a cigarette like it was a test. I didn't take it. She didn't mind. That's how it started. We didn't become friends overnight. It took a few arguments, a prank war, a ruined science project. But somewhere between freshman year and the night she snuck me into the pool after hours, we became us. We weren't alike. I was the good girl, buttoned up, soft-spoken, always worried about what people would say. She was all elbows and boldness, spoke like she had nothing to lose. But together, we made sense. She dared me to be braver. I dared her to slow down. By the time we graduated, we had our own language. Half glances, half sarcasm. I could tell what kind of day she was having by the way she closed her locker. When she got married at 19, I was the maid of honor. I made her bouquet myself, out of flowers we stole from her neighbor's garden. She laughed through the whole ceremony, like she couldn't believe any of it was real. After the vows, we stood behind the church and she whispered, "I give it 5 years." It lasted 43. We raised our children like cousins. Every summer, our families camped at Bramble Lake. The kids swam until they were pruny, and she and I sat under the trees drinking boxed wine out of mismatched mugs. Every Tuesday, for 22 years, we had lunch at the same diner, Booth 4. The waitress called us the troublemakers. We tipped big and laughed louder than we should have. Sometimes people stared. We liked that. She was there when my mother died. She came over in the middle of the night with grocery store sushi and 2 bottles of wine, said grief's easier on a full stomach. She was there when I had my knee surgery, slept on my couch, made eggs every morning even though she couldn't cook to save her life, said my toast tasted like guilt. I was there when her husband left her, when her youngest got arrested, when she turned 60 and cried because she thought she hadn't done enough. We were messy, flawed, but we were there until we weren't. The last time I saw her was in the hospital. Her hair had grown out gray, but she still wore that same damn red lipstick, smudged, confident. She looked tired. We both knew it. She gave me her ring, the turquoise one I always loved, said she wanted me to have it before her daughters fought over it. We didn't say goodbye. We never did. And then she died. Her daughter called me on a Tuesday. I remember because I was putting on my shoes for lunch at the diner. "She passed this morning," she said, voice flat. "The service is Saturday." we'd like you to say something." I didn't cry. I said thank you. I hung up. I sat back down on the couch. And I didn't go. I watched the sky that morning, wore a black dress I knew she hated. She said it made me look like a sad librarian. I made weak coffee in her old mug, the one with the faded "world's okayest friend" text. I didn't go to the church. I didn't call the family. I didn't send flowers. People talked. They always do. Some said I must be sick. Others said I was bitter. One of her daughters left a voicemail. "You should be ashamed." But here's the thing. Grief isn't polite. It doesn't wear heels and arrive on time. Sometimes grief makes you sit in the silence. Not because you don't care, but because you care so much that stepping into that building would shatter something you've spent a lifetime holding together. There was something between us, something small, a sentence, years ago. Nothing loud, but it stayed. She said to me once at Bramble Lake, after a few too many drinks and an argument over politics, "You're lucky no one expects much from you." I laughed at the time, called her a bitch. We both laughed, went on with the weekend. But something cracked. It made me look at all the years a little differently. Made me question how much of me was being tolerated, not loved. I never told her how that felt, and she never asked. Years passed. We got older, softer, but that sentence lived rent-free in the back of my mind. It moved in, rearranged the furniture. I started hesitating before calling her, started pulling away in invisible ways. Not obvious, not cruel, just quieter. She noticed, I think, but neither of us were the kind of woman to say, "Hey, did that one sentence 8 years ago hurt you?" We're from a generation that stitched our wounds under sweaters and smiled through the bleeding. When she died, they found a journal, a little blue notebook. It had recipes, grocery lists, some song lyrics, and on one page, just one, was a note. Some people carry you. Some people carry the idea of you. I think I did the latter to her. I hope she knows I did love her, flawed and full. That page gutted me. Not because it was an apology, but because it meant she knew. She knew she had said something that hurt. She knew I had drifted, and she let me. Maybe that was her way of loving me, letting me pull back, even when she didn't want me to. So no, I didn't go to her funeral. I didn't sit in that pew and pretend we were perfect. I didn't stand at the podium and list all the good things like nothing ever cracked. But I kept her coffee mug, and every Tuesday, I go to the diner, booth 4. I order for 2. Sometimes I even talk to her. Call me strange, call me selfish, but that's the only kind of goodbye I know how to give.
We didn't start out as friends. In fact, for the first month I knew Marion Briggs, I thought she was the kind of girl I'd only watch from across the room. You know the type. Hair always a little wild, skirt always a little short, laughter like a dare. She walked like she owned the hallway, even when she didn't know where her locker was. And me? I was the girl who read books during lunch and wore her hair in braids long after it stopped being cute. I wore the same sweater 3 days in a row, not because I didn't have others, but because it was the only one I felt like myself in. We weren't supposed to find each other, but sometimes the world doesn't care about what's supposed to happen. It started in the girls' restroom, third floor, right after gym class. I had been crying, not because of anything big, just one of those days when everything felt too tight. Your shoes, your chest, your life. She came in humming something jazzy, like she belonged in a smoky bar instead of middle school. She looked at me, puffy eyes, blotchy cheeks, and said, "You want a cigarette?" I shook my head. She shrugged, pulled one out anyway, and leaned against the stall door like she had nothing better to do. "You cry quiet," she said. "That's dangerous." That was the first time anyone noticed the way I cried. After that, it was slow. A nod in the hallway, a shared look during roll call. She sat beside me during detention once, not because she had to, but because she wanted to see if I'd share my Cheetos. I didn't. We weren't fast friends. We were careful. She tested me, said things to see if I'd flinch, dared me to skip class once. I said no, but I met her afterward anyway. I think that mattered to her. And when I finally told her about my mom, how she could turn mean without warning, how sometimes the house felt like walking on cracked ice, Marian didn't gasp or give me the "oh, honey" face. She just said, "Yeah, my dad's kind of like that. He drinks silence." It was the strangest thing how not being shocked made me feel safe. We found each other in the spaces most people avoided. Back alleys, old parking lots, rooftops of empty school buildings. She showed me how to climb the water tower without breaking your ankle. I showed her how to forge a hall pass that actually worked. She was bolder than me, but never reckless. Everything she did, even the wild things, had this strange kind of logic. Chaos with a blueprint, she called it. She had plans, big ones. She wanted to get out of town, live in New York, maybe write for a magazine or host a radio show. I didn't know what I wanted. I still don't sometimes. But being with her made me feel like I could want something, like I had permission to dream, even if it didn't go anywhere. We had a booth. It started as a joke. There was this tiny diner off Route 11, Tammy's Eats. Red booths, cracked vinyl, a jukebox that only played sad country songs. One afternoon, we ended up there during a thunderstorm, soaked through, trying to dry off with napkins. We ordered fries and cherry pie. The waitress, Tammy herself, rolled her eyes at us like she'd seen 1,000 soggy teenagers before. That was the day we carved our initials in the table. M plus J inside a crooked heart. We came back every Tuesday after that. Marian was fearless in ways I still don't understand. She once stood up to the principal for calling a girl's skirt distracting, got detention for it. I think she liked the fight more than she liked winning. She told me once, "The trick to surviving here is to never let them decide who you are." I asked her how you do that. She said, "Start by never apologizing for being complicated." She got into her first serious relationship before I did. A boy named Kenny with too much cologne and not enough ambition. I hated him on sight, but she loved how he looked at her like she was dangerous. They broke up after 6 months, but I remember her crying for 2 full days. She didn't let many people see her soft. I was one of the few who did. We had a rule: no crying alone. When I fell for a boy named Luke, she called him a walking wallpaper sample. Bland, polite, forgettable. She wasn't wrong, but he was kind to me, and at that time of my life, kindness felt revolutionary. When he dumped me the week before prom, she took me out to the field behind the elementary school, set off fireworks she had stolen from her uncle's garage, and yelled, "You are too good for him." That was Marian. She didn't fix things. She blew them up and told you it was beautiful. People asked if we were ever more than friends. We weren't. But sometimes I think we loved each other more fiercely than some marriages last. We shared toothbrushes, bank passwords, secrets we swore we'd never tell. She knew where I hid my emergency money. I knew where she kept the letters she never mailed to her mother. We never used the word soulmate. That was too Hallmark, too pink and soft. But if I had to pick one person to haunt a house with, it would have been her. By the time we were in our 20s, people started calling us the twins. We didn't look alike, not even close, but we moved like we were choreographed, finished each other's sentences, argued like old lovers, forgave like sisters. She got married. I stayed single. I was her maid of honor. She wore a blue dress, not white, and walked down the aisle to Janis Joplin. During the reception, she whispered, "What if I made a mistake?" I said, "Then I'll help you unmake it." She nodded. "That's why you're my person." Looking back, I think I started measuring time in before Marian and after Marian. She was the constant, even when everything else shifted. When my dad died, when I quit school, when I got my first job at the library. Every milestone had her fingerprints on it. And maybe that's why her absence feels so loud now. Because it's not just her that's gone. It's the version of me that only existed when she was around.
It wasn't a fight. If it had been a real fight, doors slammed, voices raised, ugly words thrown like knives, I might have known what to do with it. Might have cleaned the mess, said the right sorry, moved on. But it wasn't that. It was just a sentence. One afternoon at Bramble Lake, maybe 10 years ago, we were sitting in fold-up chairs, watching the kids try and fail to make a campfire. I had brought my ridiculous sun hat, the one with the blue ribbon, and Marian kept teasing me that I looked like I was about to host a cooking show for ghosts. We had wine in paper cups, cheese that had started to sweat in the heat. A perfect day, really. And then, somewhere between the third refill and the fourth story about her neighbor's affair, she leaned back and said, "You know, you're lucky no one expects much from you." I laughed. Or at least, I made the sound of someone who didn't want to ruin the afternoon. Said something like, "Gee, thanks," or "Guess I'm underachieving in style." She laughed too. But it didn't feel right. It felt like there was something under the sentence. Something old. Something that had been waiting for a soft moment to slip out. I tried to let it go. Really, I did. I kept sipping my wine, kept smiling, kept nodding as she told me about the book she was reading and the class she was taking, and how her daughter had finally started speaking to her again. But that sentence, it sat in my lap like a wet towel. "You're lucky no one expects much from you." What did she mean? That I coasted through life? That I'd been small on purpose? That I wasn't as sharp, as bright, as capable as she was? But that made things easier for me? Was that how she saw me? A shadow next to her spotlight? I told myself it was nothing. Marian said things, blunt things, always had. She didn't filter, didn't pad the truth with sugar. But still. That night, back in my tent, while the loons called across the water and the children whispered ghost stories under blankets, I replayed it over and over. "You're lucky." Lucky? I stayed behind when she moved away. I worked at a job I didn't love because it paid the bills. I took care of my father when he was dying, even when it meant missing out on years of my own life. I wasn't brave, maybe, but I wasn't lucky either. I had built my life out of choices. Maybe quieter ones, maybe smaller, but they were mine. And now my best friend had boiled them down to a kind of accidental freedom. No one expects much from you. Like I was the sidekick in a story she'd been starring in all along. After that, something changed. I didn't say anything, of course. That's not who I was. Not then. We still talked, still laughed, still had our Tuesdays. But I started pulling back in small ways. I stopped bringing up the things that bothered me, stopped asking for her opinion when I already knew what she'd say. I answered the phone, but I let it ring longer. I showed up, but not early anymore. I smiled, but I didn't reach for her hand when she cried. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was self-preservation. It was the realization that maybe I had been more invested in the us than she had. There were moments, little ones, when I caught her watching me, like she sensed something had shifted, but she never asked. And I didn't tell. We're not the generation that lays things bare. We're the generation that tightens the lid and calls it grace. One afternoon, maybe a year after the lake, I stood in my kitchen peeling apples. I was listening to a radio interview with some author who said, "The deepest betrayals are the ones we can't explain to anyone else." I remember putting down the peeler, just holding the apple in my hand and thinking, yes, that. Because how could I explain it to anyone else? She told me I was lucky no one expects much from me. They'd laugh or shrug or say, "That doesn't sound so bad." And maybe it wasn't. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I had placed too much weight on a single moment. But pain doesn't care about maybe. Pain just settles in your bones and waits. She was still Marion, still generous, still outrageous and funny, and maddening. She helped me repaint my bathroom, even though she hated the color I chose. She made fun of my new boyfriend until I broke up with him, and then said, he wasn't all bad. At least he brought snacks. She showed up when my dog died. Didn't say anything, just sat with me on the porch while I sobbed into her shoulder. She was still there, but she wasn't here. Inside me, the way she used to be. Something had gone missing. Or maybe something had finally revealed itself. When I think back, I wonder, was it always like that? Had she always seen herself as the main act and me as the intermission? Or had we just grown apart, slowly, like driftwood separating in a lazy river? Was that moment at the lake the break? Or just the light that revealed the cracks? I kept going to the diner. She still picked the music on the jukebox. We still ordered the same pie. But I stopped laughing as loud, stopped sharing as much. There were new inside jokes I didn't understand, names I didn't recognize. I wasn't jealous. Not really. I was just sad. Because friendship, when it's real, feels like home. And I had started to feel like a guest in a place I used to own. We never fought. We never said the words. We never even hinted at a goodbye. We just kept living. But I think we both knew something had ended. Quietly. Softly. Without fanfare. And that's why when she died, when her daughter called, when the funeral was set, I couldn't go. Not because I didn't love her, but because the grief had started long before the casket. Because I'd already mourned what we were. Not at all, but over years, in pieces. With each small silence, each polite smile, every sentence I didn't say.
We never made up. Let's get that clear. There was no big apology, no dramatic hug in the rain, no soft moment where one of us reached out and said, "Let's not waste any more time." There was just life and time and birthdays and grocery lists and arthritis and broken toasters and grandkids. We drifted and kept drifting. But somehow, in the spaces between those silences, we still aged side by side. We didn't talk much that last decade. Sometimes a text, sometimes a forwarded article that she thought I'd like. One time, she sent me a picture of an ugly lamp and said, "This looks like your taste." I replied, "Jealousy doesn't look good on you." We were still us, just quieter, more careful. I held on to that tiny string of contact like it was oxygen, because I wanted to believe that this dull version of our friendship was just temporary, that we'd circle back someday. Maybe once her pride shrank and my bitterness softened. Maybe once one of us got sick and mortality made everything small again. I kept imagining the moment. We'd sit across from each other at the diner, older and softer, hands full of veins and stories, and one of us would say, "I missed you." And the other would say, "I missed you too." That was my hope. Not restoration. Just recognition. Just her eyes locking with mine in that way that used to mean, "I see you. I still know you." But we didn't get that. The truth? We outlasted our intimacy. We grew old. Anyway, without the repair. Without the reckoning. Just old. And that's the part nobody tells you, that sometimes the person you knew better than anyone becomes someone you recognize, but don't reach for anymore. Not because you hate them, but because you don't know what to say anymore. Because what you needed from each other once, belly laughs, fierce loyalty, borrowed sweaters, secrets, no longer fits in your present life. Sometimes I wonder if she ever sat with that thought too. If she ever scrolled past my name in her phone, paused, then kept scrolling. If she ever started to dial. If she remembered the way I used to sneak licorice into her locker, or how I once walked 3 miles in the snow just to bring her soup when she had the flu. Did she ever miss me, the girl I was?
Or did she only miss the version of me that didn't ask hard questions? One night, maybe a year before she died, I dreamt about us as teenagers. We were lying on our backs in the grass under stars. She said, "Do you think we'll still be best friends when we're old?" And I said, "No, we'll be something even better. We'll be each other's witness." That's what I believed back then, that we would hold each other's lives in our poems, that when memory failed and bodies betrayed and spouses left or died, we would still have this, us, to say, "I remember who you were. I was there." But I didn't go to her funeral. And now I don't know who held that space for her. Or if anyone whispered, "She used to be lightning." Or if someone just said, "She had a lot of friends." Because I wasn't there to be her witness. And she wasn't there to ask why. But here's the strange thing about hope. It doesn't always look like a happy ending. Sometimes it looks like being able to sit with all the quiet that followed and still whisper, "You mattered to me." Even when I didn't say it out loud. Even when it was too late.
I didn't expect to be in the will. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, not really spoken. And yet somehow, when her daughter called and said, "Mom wanted you to have something," my hands went cold. It wasn't jewelry, not a painting, not a letter. It was a notebook. Worn, cloth-covered, held together by a fraying elastic band, the kind she always carried in her purse, in her tote, in her car. I hadn't seen one in years, but the moment I touched it, I remembered the way she used to scribble mid-conversation, half recipes, grocery lists, quotes from books, sometimes snippets of dreams she had the night before. This one smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust. It felt heavy, not in weight, but in consequence. Her daughter had said, "I think she meant for you to read it." I almost didn't. For weeks, it sat on my kitchen counter. Every morning, I'd walk past it, pour coffee beside it, check my mail with it in the corner of my eye. I was scared. Not of what was in it, but of what wasn't. Because there was a version of this story where she left me a blank journal, and that would have hurt worse than any accusation. Because emptiness carries its own sharpness. I opened it on a Wednesday. Quiet morning, no wind, the kind of day that feels suspended in time. The first few pages were mundane. Notes from appointments, ask doctor about cholesterol, a list of movies she wanted to watch, remind Clara to bring back casserole dish. Then, halfway in, something changed. A header. For her. In case I never say it. My breath caught. She never used my name. Not once. But I knew. She said, "Sometimes I wonder if we could go back. Not to fix anything, just to see how small the damage was before we let it grow." There are days when I replay that conversation and I don't remember what I meant. But I remember your face. I remember you trying to smile through it. I knew you were hurt, and I knew I should say something, but my pride is a loud thing, and silence became easier. We built our friendship on bravery, so it's cruel that cowardice took it down. I had to close the book, get up, walk around. I made tea I didn't drink, stared out the window at a bird I couldn't name, cried without sound.
because reading her voice again, was like being haunted in the most intimate way. I returned to the journal that night, candle lit, her mug in my hands. I read slowly, like if I rushed it, I'd miss something holy. She'd written memories I'd long forgotten. The time we danced in the kitchen to Whitney Houston after she'd had too much wine. The day she came with me to get my ears pierced at 47. A page full of inside jokes only she and I would get. And then, this. You weren't an easy friend, but you were a true one, and I think I stopped knowing how to be either. Sometimes I wondered if I kept you close because you knew who I was before the world told me who I should be. Losing you didn't happen all at once. It was in the not calling, the not asking, the letting months pass without outrage. That was the betrayal, not anger, but acceptance. And here's the part I didn't expect, the forgiveness. The part that said, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means you outlived the question. But let me answer anyway. Yes, I loved you. Still do, even when I didn't act like it. And I was proud of you, even when I rolled my eyes, even when I said you were being dramatic. You never needed me to say it, but you deserved to hear it. We were a story, maybe not a perfect one, but one worth remembering. That night, I slept with the journal beside me like a relic. I didn't dream. I didn't need to, because I had her voice back, even if only on the page. And somewhere in that mess of ink and vulnerability, she gave me something I never thought I'd get. A goodbye that sounded like love.
I wrote her 100 letters. Never sent a single one. Some were in my head. Others I scrawled in the backs of receipts, in margins of cookbooks, on envelopes I never meant to mail. I wrote them while boiling pasta, while folding laundry, while waiting in line at the DMV. I wrote them when I saw women laughing at cafes, when I saw someone in a blue sweater like hers, when my granddaughter used the word always in that same emphatic, Marian-like way. None of them were polished. None of them started with, "Dear Marian." They just started, like my thoughts had been waiting for a door to open. I think about all the things I never said, all the versions of myself she never got to meet. She never saw me go back to therapy, never knew I got my cholesterol under control, never tasted the banana bread recipe I finally perfected after 26 failed attempts. She never saw me cry at my daughter's wedding, not because I was sad, but because I wanted to tell her about the song they danced to. It was our song, the one we used to sing off-key in the car in '79. I never told her that I got the dog she always said I needed, that I named it June, after the month we used to claim as ours. I never told her that I kept her Christmas cards in a shoebox under my bed, that I reread them every year, even the ones that just said, "Love, M." I never told her that I was angry. I was angry that she didn't fight for us. Angry that she let one careless comment sit like a stone between us and never moved it. Angry that she let me drift away and only pulled me back with jokes and passive texts and birthday memes. I wanted her to say something real, but I never asked for that either, because I was just as proud, just as scared, just as convinced that silence was safer than opening a wound we didn't know how to stitch. One of the letters I wrote was 2 full pages. I wrote it after I saw her at the grocery store, 3 aisles down,
laughing with someone else. I ducked behind the cereal and wrote it right there in the Notes app on my phone. It started with, "You looked happy today, and I hated that." Not because I wanted her miserable, but because her joy made mine feel invalid. Like maybe I'd imagined our closeness. Maybe I'd overvalued something she had long put down. I wrote, "You replaced me so easily." Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you were always better at making friends than keeping them. And then I deleted the whole thing, because bitterness when written down sounds childish. And I wasn't a child anymore. The truth? I loved her in ways I didn't know how to say out loud. We weren't sisters, we weren't lovers, we weren't anything with a clear rule book. We were chosen family, stitched together by 1,000 shared Tuesdays, endless phone calls, and the kind of shorthand that only decades can write. But I didn't know how to say, "You were my favorite person," because women aren't taught to say that about their friends. We're taught to value romance, to put grief in neat boxes labeled husband, mother, child. But what about the friend who held your hand during your abortion? The friend who knew your first password? Who cried with you in parking lots? Who stayed up all night when your dad died and made terrible tea but refused to leave? What box does that go in? What ceremony do we have for that kind of heartbreak? After she died, I wrote her one last letter. Not on a receipt, not in my phone, but on paper. Real paper. I used a pen she once borrowed and never gave back. Blue ink, smudged at the edges. It wasn't long, it wasn't poetic. It just said, "You were home to me, and now I don't know what to do with all these rooms." I never showed it to anyone. I folded it into a cookbook she gave me in 1986, the one with the gravy stain on page 17 and her tiny handwriting beside the gingerbread recipe. Sometimes I open that page just to look at her note. "Use dark molasses, trust me." That's how I hear her now. Through things like that. Through instructions that sound like advice, like care, like memory that won't rot. I wish I could say that I've forgiven everything, that I no longer ache, that her silence didn't bruise something in me that still hasn't healed, but I'm too old for lies. The truth is, there are still days I want to pick up the phone and scream, to ask her why she made me feel disposable, to tell her that I didn't need her to fix it, I just needed her to see it, to see me. But I don't scream, I sit, and I write, to no one, and maybe to her. I think love, the kind that doesn't get closure, becomes ritual. Lighting a candle, wearing her favorite color, singing along to that old Joni Mitchell song and crying during the second verse for no reason you can explain. Love becomes what's left when all the big moments have passed, when it's just you, and the echo, and the letters you never sent. I didn't go to her funeral. I baked muffins instead. Lemon poppy seed, her favorite. I made them slowly, measured everything twice, stirred by hand. No electric mixers, just muscle and memory. I lined the tin like she used to, little crosses of parchment paper instead of store-bought cups. I set the oven to 350, and I waited. The world buried her while I watched the muffins rise. People called. Some left voicemails. Her niece said, "We missed you. I know she would have wanted you there." The pastor texted, "There's still space in the front row if you change your mind." But I didn't. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to be her past tense yet. Grief is strange. It doesn't arrive all at once like people say. It trickles in. It hides in toast crumbs and forgotten playlists and the way you still glance at the passenger seat. It waits until you're alone at the kitchen sink and someone on the radio says her name, and suddenly you're crouched on the floor, sobbing into a dish towel. So no, I didn't go to her funeral. Because I wasn't grieving her in ceremony. I was grieving her in crumbs and towels and songs and the smell of lemon zest. They say funerals are for the living, but I'm not sure that's true. The funeral they held for her wasn't mine. It had flowers and polite silence and a slideshow of pictures I didn't take. It had hymns she didn't like and eulogies for people who only knew her by the shape she wore in public. But I knew her in private. I knew her barefoot, sarcastic, with green clay on her face and rollers in her hair. I knew her laugh when it broke into snorts, the way she hated cantaloupe but pretended otherwise at brunches. I knew the way she drank her coffee, too much cream, exactly 3 Splenda, and how she only ever drank half the cup. No one spoke about that her. They buried a version of her, not mine. So instead I made muffins. I set a plate for 2. I lit a candle and I said nothing. Not out loud, but inside I said everything. I told her about the dog, about the grief, about the journal. I asked her what she meant on page 42. I argued with her about page 76. I laughed at the part where she misspelled regret 3 different ways. I said, I wish we'd had that diner scene, the one in my head. And then I said, but we didn't. And I guess that has to be okay. The candle burned out around midnight. The muffins went cold, and I went to bed. I didn't dream. Not of her, anyway. But sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up and swore I smelled her perfume. That cheap floral one she wore for 30 years. I went to the kitchen. Nothing there. No candle. No ghosts, just crumbs on a plate. Still, I whispered, "Good night." And I swear I heard, "Night, dummy." Sometimes people ask if I regret it. Not going. Not saying goodbye the right way. And here's the thing. I think there is no right way. Some people need to cry in pews. Some people need casseroles and condolences and black dresses. I needed muffins and silence and the scent of her memory warming my kitchen. I think about driving to the cemetery sometimes. I map the route. I check the hours. I imagine walking up, placing a flower, whispering something profound. But I never go, because the truth is, I don't think she's there. She's in the scribbles in my cookbooks, in the playlist we made in 2006, in the stupid ceramic mug I refuse to wash. She's in the gaps, the pauses, the space between one season and the next. So no, I didn't go to her funeral. But I never left her either. And maybe that's enough. Maybe not everything needs a bow tied around it. Maybe love can end without conclusion. Maybe grief, in its own stubborn way, is the proof that we were real. Maybe these muffins, this silence, this ache, is the altar I bring my love to. Or maybe I'm just an old woman talking to shadows. Either way, I still make lemon muffins every September. One always goes untouched, just in case.
There's this mug, white ceramic, hairline crack near the base, faded print of a duck in rain boots. We bought it at a yard sale in '91, 50 cents. Marion insisted it looked morning-ish, whatever that meant. She used it for everything: tea, coffee, soup, even cereal once when she didn't want to wash a bowl. After she died, her daughter let me take something from the kitchen. I took the mug. It doesn't make sense, really. I have nicer ones. Bone china from my wedding registry, a porcelain set from Italy, a fancy heat-sensitive one my granddaughter got me for Christmas. But this one, it fits in my hand like something meant to be there, like memory molded into clay. Some days I use it. Other days, I just hold it. I run my thumb over the crack and remember the afternoon she dropped it. Too much laughing, not enough grip. She'd spilled soup all over my carpet. We didn't even try to clean it right away. We just sat on the floor, eating crackers, listening to the rain, and talking about whether or not ghosts existed. She didn't believe in them, but she did say, "I think some people haunt us without dying first." And I said, "Like exes?" And she said, "No, like you." I threw a cracker at her. The mug became a shrine. Unintentionally. I placed it on my windowsill at first, beside a potted basil plant she gave me. Then I started noticing things. The way the sunlight caught the crack just right in the mornings. The way steam curled from it like it was sighing. The way holding it made me feel accompanied. Not whole, not unbroken, but accompanied. My daughter once asked why I still kept it. "It's old," she said. "It leaks. The handle's chipped." I said, "So am I." I think there's something holy about the things we keep after loss. Not the obvious keepsakes, not the framed photos or funeral cards or sympathy notes, but the other things. The cardigan with one missing button, the half-used lipstick, the grocery list in their handwriting still stuck to your fridge after all this time. The things that never meant to become relics, but did. Because they still smell like her. Because they still sound like her laugh. Because they still hurt. And that hurt feels honest. The mug taught me something I didn't expect. That healing isn't grand. It's not a sunrise epiphany or some sobbing release under the stars. It's quieter. Like realizing one day that you didn't flinch when you saw her favorite color. Or that you went a whole morning without thinking of her and feeling both guilty and grateful for that. It's finding joy in the same place where you once curled up with grief.
It's learning how to sit beside your ache without needing it to go away. Last week, I dropped the mug again. Well, almost. It slipped, hit the counter, rolled, and somehow landed safely. My heart stopped. But when I picked it up, I laughed and I said out loud, "Not today, Marion." Then I made tea and drank the whole cup. I kept her mug, not because I couldn't let go, but because sometimes healing looks like holding on, gently, intentionally, with full knowledge that it might break again, and maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't always need to fix everything. Maybe some things are meant to stay cracked, just enough to remind us that we survived, that she mattered, that we mattered. And every time I hold that silly little duck mug, I remember her saying, "You're not as fragile as you think." And for the first time in a long while, I believe her.
I never really understood how much space a person could take up until she left. Not just physical space, though the house did feel bigger after, but the kind of space only certain people know how to fill. The pause before a punchline, the empty chair at a kitchen table, the silence on the other end of a joke you once told for them, not to them. Marion took up space in my story in a way few ever have. And when she was gone, the story didn't end. It just changed rhythm. People always ask, "What was she to you?" And I never know what to say. Not because I don't have the words, but because none of the words feel right. We weren't family by blood. We weren't lovers. We weren't anything that makes obituary sense. But we were us. A strange, loyal, irreverent kind of us. I used to call her my idiot. She used to call me grandma, even though I'm only 3 years older. It never meant anything, and it meant everything. Here's what I've learned. There are relationships that rewrite you. Not dramatically, not with fireworks or heartbreak songs, but in quiet, subtle ways. You start quoting them without realizing. You develop habits they used to mock you for. You begin to say things like, "I'm fine," in a tone only they would understand as, "I'm not." And even after they're gone, those rewrites stay. You catch yourself smiling at something she would have hated. You catch yourself missing her disapproval. You carry them in the way your voice lowers, the way you fold sheets, the way you butter your toast. Not loudly, not obviously, but constantly. I didn't get to say goodbye. Not properly. Not in the kind of scene movies give you with teary confessions and final squeezes of the hand, but maybe that wasn't ever our style. Maybe we always said the important things sideways, through eye rolls and mid-bite sarcasm, through making tea without asking, through staying on the phone without talking. Sometimes I wonder, if she were still here, what would we fight about next? What ridiculous show would she force me to watch? Which restaurant would we swear off together again? What would her hair look like now? Would she have finally let it go gray? I keep waiting for time to soften it. The ache, the hollowness, the strange, quiet grief of losing someone who was never mine to begin with. And in some ways it has. But mostly I think I've just learned how to walk alongside it, like a limp you stop apologizing for, like a scar you forget to hide. I don't talk about her much anymore, not because I've forgotten, but because when I do, I get that look from people that, oh, you're still grieving? Kind of pity. But the truth is, grief isn't linear. It doesn't fade neatly. It echoes. It loops. It curls around the days you least expect. It shows up in line at the pharmacy. It pulls up a chair when you're alone on your porch. It reminds you, in the quietest voice, you loved deeply, and she mattered. So now, I carry her in the pauses, in the unsaid, in the not quite. I don't need to post about her. I don't need to tattoo her name or plant a tree. Though, maybe I'll still plant that tree, because she would have rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, now you're one of those people." And I'd say, "Yeah, I'm grieving with Pinterest now." And we'd laugh. God, I miss that laugh. I once read that some people are like constellations. You don't always see them, but you navigate by them. And Marion, she's still up there, in the shape of who I became.